Afternoon. My name is Catherine Atkin, and I'm an attorney at the Stanford Law School Center for Legal Informatics and a big fan of the World Green Economy Organization. I just want to thank them for the opportunity to be part of this panel today, to have this rich conversation with this overflow panelist crew. And just to recognize that the World Green Economy Organization is so important because we talk a lot at the COP and, those of us who go to conferences, and we all say we have to stop talking, we have to start doing. And the thing is, doing means working directly on the ground in the countries that are most affected by climate change and most in need of support for the green transition. And so I think the World Green Economy Organization and the GAGE network is a very powerful arterial for our work, and I look forward to our conversation informing that. So I have the honor of a panel about vocational skills for this green economy. Obviously, we need investment in the sector and in the technology, but without capacity development and bringing along communities in this transition, one, we're not going to get it done. We're not going to create more sustainability and decarbonization, and we're also not going to get the political and stakeholder buy-in that's required for us to continue on this journey to someplace better. So with that, we're going to talk about vocational educational training, about the infrastructure, and to hear from this group that is working at many different levels, trying to sort of come together in that value chain of just transition. So I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists, and then we'll open this up. Luca Brusa is the Chief of External Relations for the United Nations. We're honored to have you here. I know there's a lot going on for you, and we appreciate your time today. We have Giles Dixon, the CEO of Wind Europe. Next, we have Ephraim Breiser, Head of Workforce and Climate Policy Partnerships at LinkedIn. Sadi Prasad, founder of World Heritage Cultural Center. And Manav Khanna, Program Manager, Just Transition, Southern Transition. So you can see we're really kind of covering the field. And I'm excited. By the end of this, we're all going to figure out what we're going to be doing together in ways that we hadn't been before. So let's just start by asking, what are the bright spots? What's happening out there? We spent a lot of time talking about how we have so far to go. But something like workforce development, we kind of know what we need to do, don't we? But there are models. What really sticks? So if each of you, actually Luca and Ephraim, let's start there. Talk about these models and what are the elements of them and how do we penetrate this sort of new green sector economies?
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. I think, well, you talk about model. I think, as you know, the UN has no model as such in that particular sense, as we have more a convening power. So we try to convene the different actors that can be relevant to implement the model. So we more work in with an institution like yours, obviously, and them to come up with models. But just to give you some examples, our model is to follow the so-called SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, with those referring to green economy and green work, 4, 7, 8, and 13. The idea is to have them integrated in a way that, different from the Millennium Goals, for those who remember those, they were not really very integrated among themselves. Here we try to have KPIs, indicator, action, the sustain one and the other. So that is our model, try to be more result-oriented than we were in the past. Then and I like very much your introduction, because you do mention about working on the ground. And that's where we switch in terms of model at the UN. Again, before this was very much a political support. Now we try to be on the ground, in the schools, in the job centers, wherever we are needed. Of course, not always offering the manpower, but definitely offering guidance and so on. I mean, now for the interest of time, I don't go into the different activities we do. But I want to say something very important, again, in terms of our approach or model to this. We do believe that, in particular for the green transition, in certain countries like LDCs, least developing countries, we really need to focus on small, mini grids, microcredit is really something we really need to invest more, and we can definitely get more funding sources for that.
Thank you so much, and we'll actually dive into the energy sector with more depth soon. But Ephraim, from your perch at LinkedIn and your work, what are you seeing as promising models?
So all of you, maybe why is LinkedIn here? I think is a place to start. And the reason for that is you and 1.2 billion of all of your friends are on LinkedIn, and you're updating your profiles. There's millions of job postings, and we can aggregate all that data, talk about different trends in the world of work. AI obviously gets a lot of attention right now, but we also have identified a bunch of green skills. We can talk about how climate change is changing the world of work, and it's very clearly one of the biggest trends in the world of work. And what we know are things like green skills are something that employers demand. In fact, the demand for green skills is growing twice as fast as supply. We also know that workers with green skills, including in workers in renewable energy, they tend to have a hiring rate that's higher than the workforce overall. In fact, globally right now it's about 47% higher. That's real opportunity for workers to get into this space. And so that behooves us to figure out how do we help, one, behooves us to get workers these skills. One, because employers are looking for this right now. And look, like I often think that employer demand is a lagging indicator of planetary need. So like there is so much work to get done, and employers want these skills right now. And two, there is real economic opportunity for workers who have them. And I'll say 2A is that right now those skills are not evenly distributed. For a lot of the fields we're talking about, they're heavily male dominated, and we have to find ways to help bridge that gender gap in that space. So a couple models that are working, and I think one model is Iberdrola's affiliate in Brazil, Neo Energia. They have helped create the school for electricians. It's helped put a lot of women to become electricians, and 80% of those women who've gone through the program are now employed, many of them by Neo Energia. And I think what I would say is the model about that model that works is twofold. One, there's a lot of local partners who can help them source program participants who are going to be successful in the program. And two, it doesn't just solve a problem for society, it solves a real business need. And that business need is Neo Energia needs workers, electricians right now. And so it means that for any TVET program, you need employers who have an immediate need for workers, and that is something that Iberdrola and Neo Energia bring to their training initiative.
Fantastic, and that's a great segue to you, Giles, just to talk about your work at Wind Europe, and how do you think about these models?
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine. So I represent the wind energy industry of Europe. There are 445,000 people working in wind across the whole of Europe. By 2030, that number needs to be 600,000 because we're building more and more wind farms every year. There are more and more wind farms in Europe to operate and maintain. Finding that extra staff is really difficult, and we're competing with every other sector of the European economy. That's our first challenge, getting people to come in. And it's a trainees market. Yep, there are more jobs on our side than there are people out there in the labour market. So we've got to find a way of getting them in. We've got to give them the right offer. But we have a second key challenge we've got to tackle, which is that the education authorities are not offering quite the right type of vocational training and skills development that our industry needs. There is a mismatch between what the young people in Europe can go and learn a vocational training college about wind energy and what our industry actually needs. We've been telling the training and education providers for years what skills we need, and they haven't been listening. We've now decided that the model has to be a tripartite approach, us as the industry, the training providers, and governments. And we're working to get those three sides of the triangle recognized across borders Europe. We have a mobility issue there, lots of small jurisdictions in Europe, and there's something that can happen globally there on the mutual recognition of qualifications as well.
Fantastic. Let's go down the line. And Sati, do you want to talk? I know you come to this with a very important perspective around culture and community. Like, what resonates with what you've heard so far? What's missing?
So, thank you for the question and thank you for saying that because, disclaimer, I come introducing a tri-level accord in a sense where you have land, sea, and cultural heritage. Cultural heritage as a climate infrastructure. Especially in marginalized communities, vocational skills and training, people adapt better and thrive if it's tied to their local roots. If the cultural leaders, elders are involved, they are more likely to thrive. But if you're bringing into a marginalized community saying, hey, I want to train you on skills, but it's going to take you away from your home, they will not feel safe about that. And they may learn the skills, but they will retract back home. And you're giving me this look, very confused look. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So, my experience with working over 20 years with 850 cultural communities, what I've learned is that when people are seen and they're valued, they're more likely to adapt to change because they don't resist change, they resist being erased. So that's the lack of what I see in this whole climate thing. And the fact that everyone almost works in parallel. Nobody collaborates. Yeah, it's the silos, and I feel like there's so many wheels being reinvented, and and people are not communicating. That's one thing. And secondly, we were handed a green economy already before the industrial age, right? Before the 1800s. Yeah, 7,000 years ago when they were farming and everything, they affected the climate, but not to this extent after we started burning fossil fuels. So we need to take a step back and go back to that cultural heritage knowledge. And the fact is that cultural heritage knowledge is not seen as expertise because it does not come from a Western institutional channel.
Thank you so much for that. And just what you're saying, it resonates across everything we're trying to do together. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Manav, what do you want to add?
Hello.
Yeah, anything you want to add in terms of models that are working, what they look like, what's missing?
So I can give a little bit perspective of my organization that we are working on and what kind of projects that we have and what studies that, let's say, like the results came out. So we are a global South think tank coming out of South Africa, and we work on just transition. And we all know if we talk about just transition, it's not only about the societal, economic, or environmental change, but at the same time, we need to be equipped with the transitional skills. So there is no just transition without the just transition skill that needed for the industry to be ready for the future. So we conducted recently, like we conducted a project which was funded by a partner, and in that we did like a little bit of mapping study, like what are the hotspots, how can we understand who is capturing the value when we look at renewable energy. We particularly look at the solar and wind energy, and then we found like basically the value chain remain highly unequal. So there is a striking difference between global North and global South country, and even within G20 countries, it's a huge gap. So what we found out, like, it's not only about the gap of finance and technology, it's actually the gap of human capability. So many countries, like, they have the resources, but they lack the policy ambition because they haven't yet mapped what is their competitive advantage. So we published this report, it's on our website. So I'm just giving you like the brief outline of the report that we worked on. And the second most effective recommendation that came out from our work is like how, let's say, the vocational training, if they are connected to industrial policy. Like, for example, South Africa, like my manager Gaylor is in South Africa at the moment and following G20 negotiations. So he is one of the co-authors for SAREM, which is the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And in that, there is a component of green skills and transition skills that we need, like the whole society needs for this, let's say, like the transition. It's called the South African Renewable Energy Technology Center that provides this kind of, like the tech skills. So I would say, like, just to, in a nutshell, it's a big gap, but if policies are aligned with the right action, there is a way forward, to make like the society and policy ready for this transition.
No, that's a really interesting insight around policy drivers. I think that's worth a quick response from a couple others here who are working at different levels. To what extent do we have to have industrial policy that really supports this in order for it to scale? And I was thinking maybe, Giles, it might be useful to hear from you, in particular about wind and solar and just renewable energy. Do you think we're especially when we talk about low and middle income countries, do we have the drivers that are needed for that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. I was listening to you, Sati, because it's very interesting what you were saying. People are worried about being uprooted from where they've always lived. Yeah. And I think you have that all over the world, in developed economies and developing economies. And renewables tend to be located, or are often located, in remote areas. Certainly wind energy is. So there's often a geographical element to getting the necessary workforce and equipping them to work in wind. We have one lever with wind and solar that other industries don't necessarily have, and that is, in most countries, you need a permit to build a wind farm or a solar park. In a lot of countries, you bid into a government auction, yeah, for the revenue, the stable revenue that the government is underwriting for you, which allows governments to ask for certain things from the wind and the solar developers. And one of those things can and should be investment in workforce development and proactive support in the skilling of the workers, in the relocation of the workers, if that has to happen, and everything that goes around that, because we're competing with every other sector of the economy. And we've got to show the people that we're trying to attract that we really care for them as individuals and their families and their communities.
I got a mic, so I'll just keep talking, because I think,
Go ahead.
There are a couple models out there that I think are really interesting, especially where policy is leading. So one model, and I think it's early days for this, so it's like hard to know if they're working. So one model that stands out to me is the Sustainable Jobs Plan in Canada. And what's really cool about that is they created a whole council that brings all of the different groups together, from indigenous populations, I think exactly to what you're describing, about how do you recognize this expertise about how to live with the land and in balance with the land, to labor unions, to employers, education and training providers, and it's out of their Department of Natural Resources. And because one of the things you have to then do is not just get all these different cross-sector groups together, but like how do you get the energy agency to talk to the labor and education industries? Because this is what Giles is talking about. Like you've got to create these ways to get feedback loops back to the education and training programs. And so this legislation only got passed a year ago. It's too early to tell if this is a model that's going to work. But when I think about what you need, which is getting all those agencies together, bringing the Labor Statistics Agency into the mix to create a common language that all these groups can use to understand the workforce challenge, it's promising. So I think that's one. I think the Office of Clean Energy Jobs in the UK, another. Again, it's new, it's early, it's too early. We don't know yet if it's going to work. But when we think about the things you need, which are these agencies talking to one another, these cross-sector councils that are set up, it's got the stuff in place. Can you implement and execute? That's the question, but at least I think the things are in place to have those deep and broad conversations.
Thank you. Great insight, Dr. Busso. Thoughts on this in terms of the UN has a special role. You're obviously not going to be creating national legislation that driving policy that way, but how do you look at your role in this when you hear these gaps and a lot of opportunity? There's a lot of like if we could just line these things up, we've got a good game plan.
Thank you, Catherine. Excellent question, in fact. I was listening very much to, in particular, to Gilles, who you asked him, what about low middle income? And he didn't answer. I don't know why, but he avoided the answer. So, but that's where we as UN actually come in. We have this role of ensuring that finance arrives to certain countries, the one you mentioned. And that's the big issue. Jill did a very excellent presentation of the model with the tripartite trainer, government, industry. That's where we have the problem in those countries. Training is there, government is there, and I would say generally it's quite okay to engage, but the industry is missing. So we need, the reason now is produce a lot of megawatt, but it's very, very expensive to implement. So more than solar, but of course it's much cleaner than solar. So we have a lot of element to discuss there, how we can bring these resources. So we have, UN, we propose the RBF, result-based financing, where we try to bring, of course, funds through different sources. The Green Fund, everybody knows, but there are other resources as well. So that's a big challenge, finance.
But the finance doesn't fund jobs. I mean, I think part of the challenge is oftentimes if you want to make things investable, the signals for investors say, yeah, we have emissions targets, but it's not usually accompanied by the jobs and skills development targets to actually ensure you have a workforce to get it done. And I mean, I think that's going to be, that's a real challenge. When I talk to a lot of the financiers, you ask them what are the categories that they assess possible deals and what makes things investable. No one's saying, is there a workforce to get it done? And what ends up happening is they'll fly a workforce in from somewhere else in the world to build a project, and that means we leave a whole bunch of local economic opportunity on the table that would otherwise be supporting local and indigenous communities.
Sati, that was a great softball to you to talk about. What does that mean to, invest in communities? And what do you think about what's been said here about funding?
Well, the way I see it, because I am part of that indigenous, community. Because from where I came from, I'm a generation descendants born in South America, Guyana, from India. I've never been to India. 6 years old, I'm selling candy and cigarettes to help with food on the table. I arranged marriage to the US. I put myself through college. So that's like, in a sense, giving somebody in a marginalized community an opportunity to do better. And 20 years later, my entire generation, up to my sister's children, are not married at 13. One is a teacher. In 8 generations worth of people who never went to school. So coming from that background, I understand the lack of opportunities there are being from marginalized communities. Yeah, and I think countries. How cool would this be? And this can be an initiative that Dr. Luca can help establish. How cool would this be if every country is tasked with, like, okay, figure out what superpowers you have in your own backyard. What are your assets? Then come to COP, and on a day we call the Trilateral Resilience Accord or something, everybody sits at the table and they have to talk to each other. Maybe country A might have what country F needs, and country B might have what country's X needs. So it's like a netting process. And then collectively, because this is our home where we're trying to protect, it's not just one country, the entire earth that we're trying to protect. How can we use the financing, the donations, and everything that we have collectively as one human race to protect all life on earth? What else do we need to invest in? So I think something that's not being tapped into is the cultural heritage part. And I go back to that. I was like, we really need to tap into it.
I love that. That's definitely a next step that we could decide to take together in some way. So, Manav, what are you thinking about when you think about global South or low and middle income countries? You've talked about policy already, but we have Ephraim saying, hey, look, when it comes to finance, I mean, we've actually got to build industries in these places. So what is it going to take to do that? When you look especially at energy, this panel is about renewable energy, so I'm going to start bringing it in a little bit.
So actually, this is the question goes to the heart of what we have doing at the Southern Transition. So how global South countries can have the voice at the international, multilateral just transition, and how just transition can be more inclusive and more equitable. So before I answer that question, I actually was when I was listening to the question, just came to my mind when I started my sustainability journey. I started as an intern with Luca Brusa. So seems like I think I was just like the transition just happened so fast, and it's an honor to be panel with him. Okay, coming back to the question is, like once we talk about the South-South collaboration, we need to understand one country cannot do everything. So that is the problem that we have to face. We are trying to not advocate, but we're trying to work on it. Like we cannot work on things to get alone. So we have to understand the value of collaboration or cooperation. So we need to understand how our capabilities are grounded to local realities, to understand what we have and what we don't have. It just being humble does not cost too much. So that is what we actually do. Like when we wrote this report, we actually recommended that there is a need to have a regional capacity building hubs, because we know that especially countries in the global south, it is not up to one country. We need to understand how regional collaboration, how cross-sectoral collaboration can be scaled, can be upgraded, and then we need to see like how we can solve this problem collectively. So I think that's one of the things that I would like to talk about. Yeah.
I really appreciated you saying we can't go at this alone, and we have to regionalize this as well. Let's talk a little bit about the funding for this. We've heard like, okay, if you have a robust industry, they should have skin in the game to fund this. We've got government. I mean, is funding for training our biggest gap? Or is it funding for these industries to make them actually happen? So if there's a couple of you that want to respond to that, I appreciate it. Giles, you're
Thanks
ready.
very much. Look, there has to be a business model in the first place for the wind and solar guys to go into a low-income economy and develop infrastructure. Has to be a revenue model, and maybe governments need to do some risk sharing as part of providing that revenue model. And global institutions and international financial institutions have a role to play in all of that, of course. Most of the money for workforce development, the industry is ready to spend itself. And we've heard how Iberdrola are doing that, for example, here in Brazil. Our main ask from governments is not so much the money, although there's some bricks and mortar involved in the training centres, but in low-income economies, the wind industry is happy to pay for a lot of that. What our main ask is from governments is tell your education ministries that they have to listen to the industry in terms of the vocational and educational training offer that they are providing. They can't go off in a silo doing their own thing, independent of what the industry actually wants. And then make sure there's a good flexible approach to labour law and employment law, that we can offer apprenticeships, we can offer internships without the initial lifetime commitment from the beginning on our side as employers. On those internships and apprenticeships, they are win-win, because the youngsters want to get some hands-on taster experience without making the commitment themselves either. But in some countries, they're held back from doing that because the labour laws are so rigid. It's either a lifetime permanent contract or nothing, which doesn't help anyone.
Okay, reactions to that passionate presentation. Ephraim.
So I've spent my whole career in workforce and economic development. And what I know about any company when they look for a location is, do I have the talent? Is the talent there that can get the work done? And if the talent's not there, is there a set of infrastructure locally that can produce that talent, that shows the collaboration, that there's communication between industry and education and training. So that's what you need to have in place. If the funding, if that's not in place, you can't just, the train and pray model does not work either. So you can't just assume that you're going to train people and it's going to work. You have to figure out how to build that demand side on it. Now, our green skills report's coming out tomorrow. We have 8 case studies of it, 7 of which are employers, 1 of which is government. And I think that's indicative of the fact Giles is right. Employers will put money in it. They have real problems. They are trying to hire talent. They need to figure out where that talent's going to come from. So whether it's Octopus Energy is another one that's featured doing this. We've seen a lot of examples from SSE doing this. We've seen a lot of examples of energy companies doing this work. They will pay for it when they have some of the other certainty in place. And I think that's where I would say, but I do think there's an important signaling that comes from whether it's NDCs, national adaptation plans, the other strategies that say, look, we know that we have to reduce our emissions by X amount. And we know that we also have to make big investments in workforce to get it done. That's what's going to be, and even here today, this is Jobs Day, the first ever Jobs Day at COP. That is a signal to the world that this is a part of what needs to be in the conversation.
Ephraim, yes, Hati, please talk about this frame around jobs, and I do think we're all learning to kind of change the frame. So I'd love to hear you talk about that, and I have a bonus question for you after that.
Okay. So, you all are speaking from the perspective as employers who need employees and skills. I'm coming from the perspective of understanding, especially marginalized communities where they are always, most often excluded from credit systems, banking relationships, even having a bank account. So there's a lot of barriers that they face to come to you to be able to get trained in all these vocational skills. But also another thing you have to remember is that if the government or an outsider is going into these marginalized communities, maybe they'll put up barriers, right? Because they're always exploited most of the time and they don't have a lot of trust. So you need somebody who's like a cultural broker going in for you, speaking their terms, being in sync with the rhythm of their land, the way they live, and then implement or introduce the vocational skills, but also train. The framework should be like train locally, but certify on a global competency type framework where they could move if they want to, but their skills are recognized cross borders.
Thank you so much. That's a great insight and was one of my questions. So I'm glad that you're getting to this, kind of what needs to be more global, what are the standards? So you're saying let communities set standards and then let communities figure out how they want to play.
Exactly.
One question more for you. So as we know, we figure out what we think people should want to do. I think part of what you're getting to is people also have to want to do it.
Exactly.
And so where do you think we are on the pull factor? Do you think in local communities they see the green transition, they see the need for renewable energy as something that motivates them? Or is it like, is this a good job? Does it meet my needs? Do you have thoughts about that?
So for the majority conversations I've had, I also work with the Commonwealth, Cambridge University, so I do have access to a lot of different countries, a lot of different cultural groups, and the consensus or the main thing that people talk about is that they want to be part of this conversation, they want to be part of this dialogue, but the path to being part of this dialogue is not clear. It's, sometimes there are recruitment firms that take a lot of the money, they just get pennies to the dollar. So you have to have a trusted resource, organization, whatever it is, that goes into these communities on your behalf. And the biggest thing, like I mentioned earlier, it has to be rooted locally with the option to move. They have to want to move. And, they should be able to go back. So when they're trained locally but with a global competency, their skills are transferable and noticed across borders.
Okay, so I'm showing my ignorance on this. Do we have those kinds of portability capacity now in this sector, say green energy sector? Is this something that needs to happen at the international standards level? Is there? Is there like an ISO standard for this? What's going on?
Even within the economically developed member states of the European Union, we do not have mutual recognition of qualifications for people to work in renewables. So this is a big, big challenge. I'm pleased to report the European Commission is about to launch an EU skills portability initiative, and we're working closely with them on the renewables part of that. But you are so right. This is priority because the people everywhere globally, whether you're in a developed economy or a developing economy, they get it on the green transition and they figure actually renewables is a future industry and a good place to be working.
Dr. Brusa, can you comment on that? Love to hear what you're thinking.
No, I mean, what has been said so far is totally correct, obviously very much in line with our thinking, but very much in line with this COP. This is a COP where these issues are being discussed, starting from just transition, which was mentioned on a few occasions, about renewable energy, climate finance, all these, and technology transfer, which is a bit what we call it to say transfer also of knowledge, transfer of standards, like you correctly say. So my appeal here, because I'm at the end of the day I'm still a UN, is that to have all your support to push this agenda item forward. We expect a very difficult COP, a COP which has started with indices which are really much far from expectations, not just the number being submitted, the expected results. There is no criteria about just transition in many of the indices, so something needs to be changed. So bringing in the negotiation all these issues is crucial, is absolutely crucial. So I cannot give you an answer. I mean, I think this is a very excellent panel, by the way, and I think we can talk for hours and hours. I mean, there are very good examples here based on Efren when he was talking about workforce. For example, in the UN, we have on the ground, we push in certain countries that 2% of the salary is paid towards training. When you start your question saying we should focus more on the industry, on the training, but the two things can go together according also to the business model that Gilles was referring to. But then at the end of the day, we really need to use this COP. They call it a COP of implementation. I call it COP of opportunity. We have a unique late opportunity to really push for these agenda items.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to have a last round for this group, but first, I'd like to finish my homework, and I did have a question about technology. So a couple of you, technology doesn't do everything. They're still human beings. They have to get trained. But are we leaving impact on the table with our use of technology at this time, or do we have it right to the extent we see bright spots?
You can do a lot with technology to expand online learning and training. In wind, we make great use of virtual reality. You put goggles on somebody, a whole headset, and they can actually what it's like to be up the top of a wind turbine.
I'm not going to take that
during
job,
repairs.
no matter what.
Look, a lot of people do want to do it, yeah? But you've got to combine it with the classroom and with the physical getting out there in a wind farm, in a factory. It's got to be a blend of the online, virtual, and the physical and actual.
Okay, anybody else passionate about this? Okay, Efren.
There's a lot of ways we could talk about tech. I think one thing, this is something we talk a lot about, which is how do you help identify people who have a lot of the skills already to do some of these jobs? And I think one of the ways that technology, especially AI, can be really helpful is say it can help go sift through big data on the skills for lots and lots of job titles and help identify people who may have lots of the skills that employers are looking for. And one example of how I've seen this work specifically is how to help people who have military experience, how to translate that to civilian experience. So to use the wind turbine example, I mean, there's like two things you need to do to be able to work on a wind turbine. You gotta know how to use tools, and you can't be afraid of heights. And turns out paratroopers are really good for that. And so how do you help using technology to help bridge some of those gaps? I think is really important because some of those may not be the obvious connection points that we on our brains make. We might be thinking, I jokingly call it the immaculate transition of a worker in oil and gas, just like showing up on renewables one day. And we know that that is not, sometimes that works, but that's oftentimes the exception, not the rule. And I think, how do you find, using technology to help identify pools of talent that are overlooked for a lot of these jobs?
Okay, fantastic. So I'm gonna, we'll have the other three speak first. To round out this panel, I'd love you to think about, say, we come back in 5 years, and we are sitting here in the WGEO pavilion. You know, what's our headline? Like, what do we want to say we got done? Sati.
I definitely have an actionable item if everybody is game for it. What about if we create an ethical framework for not just technology, but for companies like yours to use to hire people from a marginalized community? And this ethical framework, basically, we are kind of creating something with Cambridge University on AI, where anybody who wants to is not basically extracting data, but is using an ethical way of getting the data, where the groups the data is coming from is recognized, there's dignity, there's respect, there's accuracy. And if they want to use this data, they can pay for it, and the money goes to the groups to help maintain their cultures, protect their heritage. So we can basically use that same ethical framework, basically, where governments, organizations, universities can reach out to these marginalized communities with that framework in hand, where the leaders of both sides come together and negotiate, instead of having a governmental institution, imposing things on people, and they will just fight back.
Fantastic. So, Sati, we know what you want to have happen when we come to the next couple COPs. Manaf, can you share with us your take home, your headline?
So I think, like, if I don't want to be optically delusion, like 5 years is just around the
Well,
corner.
yes.
But if I have to wish something, I would say, like, if policy framework are grounded in reality, that connects to global standard that many people talk about. So I think that actually makes, I would say, like, our life easy, because then we don't need to deal with the European Union framework, African framework, Chinese framework. So if there is a standardization across this framework, I think it just makes life everyone's easy. So I would say.
Okay, so I'm hearing a
standardization,
theme of let's get together globally and try to create some cross-cutting framework standards. Ephraim, what are you thinking? We're going to go down and end with Dr. Russo. So.
I didn't realize I was next. I think, 5 years from now, we'll be getting the next round of NDCs. And what I want is 100% inclusion of jobs and skills as something that every country, every government is going to be investing in and making sure is part of what makes their NDCs investable.
Fantastic.
My wish is a revolutionary change in the mindset of the middle classes, both in developed and developing economies. Because too many parents in the middle classes want their kids to become doctors, lawyers, accountants, and nothing else. And that is no good. 2/3 of the new jobs we need to create in wind in Europe are blue collar. And it's the same everywhere. And there are too many middle class parents, and the middle classes are growing in every country of the world, of course, who think, no, those are careers for other people, but not for our kids. And that's got to change.
And I'll just say, these jobs are not replicable by AI. And one of the things that I think everyone is nervous about, because the other job people were talking about was software developer, and that's a job that we're seeing is not having the same hiring that it did before. We see it in our data. And so I think a lot of the jobs that are in this space are not AI replicable, and that means there's I think you're right. You got to change the stigma, but I think it's because this is where there's going to be a lot of opportunity.
Thanks, Ephraim, so much. You mean I might have to tell my kids to climb up on the top of a wind turbine and be okay with it? Okay. Dr. Bruce, I'm going to let you close it out.
No, I'm interested, Can I give you my CV? No? Change the career. You pay well? No, I'm joking.
No, you cannot leave your job.
No, seriously. But I think you put a very, very important issue there, apart that. 5 years, I think Ephraim took the line from me, is about the NDC. It's a process, and this is what we expect. We need to work to have better NDCs. And that's I think our goal for the next couple of years. And I know the way Joe is actually, I think I saw you right there, is also very much involved, engaged into that activity. So, yeah, so down there. So we need to focus a lot on NDC capacity building.
Oh, well, thank you. I just want to say an amazing panel came up with some really concrete ideas, and I know that WGO Engage is on the cutting edge of capacity development and workforce transition. So I want to thank them for today and thank all of you for being amazing. So let's go.
Great pleasure meeting.